Hi, I'm Nancy Howell, the museum educator at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and I want to welcome you all to Scientist Saturday, this lovely Saturday. I hope you're enjoying your stay at home. I hope everybody's being safe, and maybe you're happen to be getting out into some of the parks just for a little relaxing walk. And it's interesting that you're probably looking at the plants that are starting to grow and bloom, the wildlife that's active, but you might not look at what's under your feet, the geology of Ohio. And that's what is going to be our spotlight today for Scientist Saturday. We're going to be looking at some of the interesting geologic occurrences in Ohio. As you're walking in the park, you might be, going by a river or a stream. You might be wondering, well, gee, how did that form? What rock layers is it cutting through? Maybe as you're walking along, your kids are picking up rocks and probably throwing them, but you look at them and you're like, gee, I wonder what this is. And so this is what we're going to be sharing today is the story of the geology, a little bit of the geology of Ohio with the curator of mineralogy, Dr. David Saja.
Good afternoon,
Good
Nancy.
afternoon.
It's a pleasure to be here. And good
Good
afternoon,
afternoon.
and good afternoon to everyone else out there who's watching. It's a pleasure to be here. As scientists, we love to talk about our research.
And you do have some fascinating research in the video that we're going to be looking at shortly. But let's clue people in. I hear or see the word mineral in your title, director or head of mineralogy. So what is it that you are actually doing in your lab? Is it just minerals?
Good question. I am curator of the Department of Mineralogy, but the Department of Mineralogy at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History is so much more than just minerals. Out of the 60,000 specimens we have, about 30,000 are rocks, 30,000 are minerals, and then there are sub-collections of polished rocks and even synthetic minerals, things made by humans. So what it is that I do? A mineralogist is a type of earth scientist who studies minerals. But more specifically, my title is petrologist. And the word petrology comes from the Greek root of the word Peter. So the Peter is the Greek word for rock. And therefore, I am a rockologist, somebody who studies rocks. And so as a title, as petrologist, you'll see me in my laboratory breaking open, cutting open, polishing, and studying rocks.
Well, David, I do know that you do rock. That's for sure.
Thank you.
And maybe some of you have visited Dr. Saja's lab, maybe in some of the behind the scenes evenings we've had. His lab is across from the Discovery Center, the hands on learning area down on the lower level. Maybe you've even peeked into the lab and seen some of the beautiful crystals and minerals and things on display there. And maybe you've even had a chance to talk with Dr. Saja at some point at when we're open at the museum. Um, but before we get into the nitty gritty of the presentation, I think we're going to be hearing some terms: mineral, crystal, and rock. So let's differentiate some of those terms.
Good point, Nancy. A mineral is a naturally occurring, inorganic, meaning it was never living, assemblage of atoms. So things like taking hydrogen and oxygen that make up water and making it into a crystal is ice. So frozen water is ice. Ice that forms outside in the form of a snowflake is a mineral. But if you just had, say, snow on the ground, that's what we would refer to as mineral. But if you were to look at a single snowflake, it has that perfect hexagonal shape. That is a crystal. So here we have a crystal of quartz. And this crystal of quartz has a specific shape to it So that's what we refer to as a crystal. It's the material inside. If I were to shatter this with a hammer, every other little piece is no longer a crystal, but it's still a mineral of quartz. And when we take a bunch of minerals like this and stick them together into a rock, then this is what we refer to as a rock. It's just a bunch of minerals stuck together.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, because that sometimes is confusing for folks when they're studying rocks, minerals, and then the term crystal pops in there as well. During the video, which we'll be seeing shortly, we're going to be taking a look at your research that's going on right now, which is tends to be a lot more about sand. And when I think of sand, I think of a sandbox, but it's a lot more than that. So tell us just what sand is and what it's composed of, and I mean it's really quite fascinating.
Yes, good, Nancy. It's sand is a misused term. Everybody thinks of it as being something special. And as we can see in these slides, that the first slide shows us a close-up of sand. In the metal grid in the right-hand corner is only about 2 millimeters in dimension. So we're probably looking at the full screen here is 1 centimeter. Each lump of mineral or little fragment of mineral and rock that we see in this view each one is a sand grain. So this is a close-up of sand. In fact, the term sand refers to a size classification. And that's our next slide. We can see on this scale that we have clays, silt, sand, and gravel. And sand is anywhere between 1/16 and 2 millimeters in size. So when you refer to sand, technically you're referring to only a size classification. The next slide shows us that sand can be of pretty much any composition. The typical sand that we find at a beach is inorganic material, like little pieces of rocks and minerals. But in the middle image, the pink image, we see that the sand from the Bahamas, for example, is totally made up of tiny, tiny fragments of seashells and coral, giving it that beautiful pink color. But then there's also anthropogenic or human-made sands, like we see in the very bottom, which is glass bottles that have been shattered and broken up into a sand-sized particles. And this sand is then shipped off to a smelter where they're melted down and made into new glass bottles. So sand is not a composition, sand is a size, and it can be almost any composition. In the next slide, we can actually see a local example of that. Here we go. Here, this is Edgewater Park. And we can see in the bottom left, zebra mussels that have accumulated after they've died. Their seashells accumulate on the beach. And then the wave action breaks up those seashells. And up in the upper right-hand corner image, we see all the little white specks. Those are the broken up zebra mussels that are now sand-sized particles of zebra mussel shell incorporated into the sands at Edgewater Park.
All right, so things are starting to clarify for me. Remember, I was mentioning that Ohio has some interesting geologic things going on. Who would have thought walking at Edgewater Park or anywhere along Lake Erie, you'd be running into sand, maybe other sized particles, and what those sand particle sizes are made up of. That's pretty cool. But I also understand that in the video, we're going to be taking a look at a gemstone called garnet, but not one that you might be wearing on your finger or as earrings, but made up as sand. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, garnet is a fascinating mineral to geologists because it forms as a metamorphic mineral. It forms at high pressures and temperatures inside of a mountain. And it is very indicative of tectonics and mountain building processes. But because it's one of the metamorphic minerals forming under high pressures and temperatures, as we know the three different rock types, igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary, it forms at very high temperatures and pressures, making it a very durable, resistant mineral. So as the mountain weathers away, and all of the rock is decomposing and crumbling away, what's left behind is usually just quartz and this garnet material, which is very resilient, and it starts to accumulate. So that resilience, that durability, is what makes it a good gemstone. So as humans find big pieces, they can fasten it into a beautiful red gemstone, which is hard and durable, or it could be crushed into a sand material and glued to paper, and we use it as sandpaper. But it's also, this garnet sand is a really neat clue into a piece of the geologic history of Ohio.
And I think that's where our video is going to be coming in to share with everybody the spotlight on garnet and the history and prehistory of where this mineral comes from. So I think we'll run our video.
Welcome to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History's Specimen Spotlight. I'm your host, Lee Hall, and today, the shifting sands of time have revealed some fascinating science in the Department of Mineralogy. Today we are here with Dr. David Saja, who is the curator of the Department of Mineralogy. Thanks for joining us, David.
Glad to be here.
So what have you got laid out for us here? I'm seeing some petri dishes and some rock specimens. So what's the story with this?
The main theme we see in all these specimens is a small crystal that is red in color, and it's garnet. We find it in sand, sandpaper, as crystals, and even inside of rocks.
So garnet is this large, dark, it's a really beautiful reddish purple. It's very dark, this crystal here.
Correct. And it has these diamond faces, and they're almost like little spheres.
Okay, so these are really big. So what does the garnet crystal in this sample have to do with these sand samples here?
What we see here is a perfect museum specimen where the crystals had the chance to grow into their perfect shape, like a tree growing out in the middle of a field that isn't interrupted by anything and can grow into the perfect tree shape. Where if it's part of a rock sometimes, it bumps into other things and it's not perfectly shaped. But when this rock decomposes and is broken down into soil and then sand, it washes down to the beach as fragments or parts of these crystals. So they're broken up, and that's why sand is just the parts or pieces of the crystals.
Okay, so this rock doesn't quite look like a museum specimen, yet it's here in a museum, and you're interested in the garnet crystals in this boulder. Where did this little boulder come from?
Correct. Well, when you see a rock like this out in the metro parks, where it's nice and rounded edges, it's been tumbled, not only in a stream, but a lot of the boulders around here have been tumbled by the glaciers and brought down from somewhere in Canada. And so we're trying to look at the minerals inside of them to find out where they came from in Canada. So this is what we refer to as a research specimen. We've collected it specifically, and we've seen here where it's been cut and polished. This face has been cut on a diamond saw so that we as geologists can see inside and understand the crystals, looking specifically for these little dots, which are the garnets.
So this boulder has been transformed through the natural processes of erosion and wave action, right, into sand.
Right. So this was originally probably a very sharp, angular rock that was broken off the mountainside somewhere in Canada, and as it was tumbled, it keeps banging into other rocks, knocking off small pieces, which keep getting ground up smaller and smaller into sand-sized fragments. And that's how sand is produced. It is the fragments that keep getting broken up smaller and smaller, and hence we can see two petri dishes here with different colors in them. This is almost pure quartz sand, and this sand is of multiple minerals in there, many different compositions.
So the sand is basically a material of a certain particle size.
Correct.
And you can have sands of different compositions or makeups.
Many different compositions. You could literally take glass bottles and crush it into 1 millimeter sized particles, and that technically is a sand.
Only if you've got really tough feet.
That's right.
Right.
You wouldn't want to be walking on that.
Awesome. So sand in this instance is sort of like a bag of trail mix, and you have all these different nuts and raisins or whatever, those different particles. And what your research is trying to do, in other words, is you're trying to figure out the farms where all of these nuts or the factories or the candy pieces came from.
Correct. So if you go up to Euclid Beach or any of the beaches here in Ohio.
And so is this from Euclid Beach?
Yes, this specimen is from Euclid Beach. And we have a permit as researchers to collect samples there and take it from the beach. So at the water's edge, you'll see dark stripes of different colored sand. And especially at Euclid Beach, Menor Headlands, and up in that area, the stripes are of a dark red color. And when you look at it under the microscope, these red minerals are the garnets that we were just talking about previously.
So they will be essentially like full crystals, just very small, or fragments of
Fragments that have been rounded. So again, they'll look pretty much like a rounded boulder, but just miniaturized to less than 1 millimeter in size.
Oh.
So they're a fragment that's been broken off and then tumbled and rounded small into a little sphere almost. But they're still brilliantly red, purple, or pink, the different compositions, showing almost like a gem quality to them. But they glisten that red color, so they'll have a red shine at the beach when you see them.
Must be really beautiful to look at.
It is, especially under the microscope.
So I'm curious about this vial over here. This is really neat. Explain what's going on here.
Okay, so not only do we have red colors, but typically in a beach, no matter where you go, you'll have stripes of black along the beach, right at the swash zone where the waves are washing the sand back and forth. That black is what we refer to as heavy minerals. You take a magnet, put it on the side of this tube, which is filled with sand and water, and you mix it up.
So you're holding the magnet to the
side of the tube.
Oh, look at that.
And then you can see that what has stuck to the magnet inside the tube is iron oxide, or the mineral magnetite.
Get out, that is too cool.
And that's the heavy sand we refer to as geologists. We'll look in the sand, and in there we'll find gold, platinum, titanium, and other economic minerals needed by society. And so we'll go out with our gold pans as a geologist, pan the sands in a stream, and if we find gold, we know upstream somewhere there's probably a gold deposit. So this is at the beach. The wave action will naturally sort the sand so that it produces concentrations by density, not just magnetic as we've done here, to stripes or concentrations of black heavy sand. But that's what makes Menor Headlands so unique, is that it's not only black sand, but mixed in there is this beautiful red garnet sand. And that's what we're trying to research.
And it's garnet that has been transported by glaciers from Canada.
Correct.
That's awesome.
Somewhere in Canada.
That's awesome. But you're still working on that.
Correct.
Still trying to figure that out.
We're
That's
sorting
the
out.
part.
Yes. And that's the tough part, is we're sorting out these very small crystals of sand-sized fragments of garnet to try to identify them and match them up to the beautiful garnets in the glacial boulders, so that we can source the sand through the glacial boulders back up to the original place of origin where they were formed in the mountains of Canada.
That is an amazing story.
So hopefully we can figure it out. It's a good detective story.
That's really cool. Well, David, thanks so much for having us here today on Specimen Spotlight. We will see you next time.
Thank you.
Well, that video was super fascinating. First of all, getting a look at your lab, seeing all the things laid out, and truly telling that story about the sand right on our beaches here in Cleveland, coming from boulders up in Canada and glaciers, and that's amazing. Has anything new been discovered since this video was done, David?
Yes, so this video was made several years ago, actually, when we started seeing this red sand and starting to collect it on different beaches along Lake Erie and as well as Great Lakes. But as you see, it's little pieces, and it's hard to get in there with a tweezer and just pull out all these little pink ones or all these little red ones and get a concentration enough. A mineralogist's main tool is a X-ray diffractometer, which uses X-rays to look at the atomic structure of a mineral to tell you exactly what it is. And for us to get enough sands concentrated, we've had to go through different sorting processes, but we've now collected enough samples that we've put these into the X-ray diffractometer, and we've started to identify what we're looking at. So if we can take a look at slide number 5, this is the close-up of the sand again. Here's Menor headlands. This is just looking down on the water at the swash zone. You can see my Sharpie pen there, or scale. And the black right under the pen, those are the heavy black sands. And we cut away a trench up in the upper right-hand corner, and you can see the black line shows you the Earth's surface, and then below that is where it's dug down into the Earth, that these layers actually do extend a little bit. It's concentrated right there at the water's headland. The next slide shows you that at Menor headlands, we also have this red deposit. So you can see how distinctly red and black is mixed in there. That's that, well, wow, this is, as a geologist, this was really sticking out when we first saw this. And it's not black, it's red. What is this red stuff? So we started collecting samples and looking at it under the microscope. The next slide is this red sand close up. And by taking out, you can see in the image that there are these almost light colored pink, dark red, as well as a purplish or brownish red colored mineral. So those 3 red, pink, and brownish red colors are giving you that brilliant red sand. And we found that those red sands are light pink rose quartz, dark red almandine garnet, and the brownish red groschular garnet. So we've now identified it as those 3 different materials making up the red color. And as in the next slide, we can see that there is one particular clue here. Notice all the nice black magnetite in the background. We can still see the red garnet, but notice that one grain that's circled in the red circle there. Look how perfectly round and smooth edges that is. As I talked about in the video, the boulders get, all rocks and material get tumbled downstream, they bump into each other and their sharp edges get rounded. This happens the longer it's in the stream being tumbled, or actually with distance down the stream that it gets tumbled, it becomes more round and round. This also happens in the glacial material that we find. So this little clue right here is this perfectly round sand grain is a clue that all the sand might be coming from glacial boulders. So in the next slide, can we go to, is there one more slide? There we go. If you visited the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, out in front of the museum by our steggy dinosaur, you'll see this boulder. And if you get there on a sunny day, all those little red dots that you can see up in the magnified view to the right are glistening, sparkling red. And each dot is a brilliant almandine garnet in this boulder. So we're now out looking around all northeastern Ohio for these glacial boulders that contain garnets. We're analyzing those garnets and the rocks that make them up and trying to say, okay, can we match this garnet boulder with the garnet sand? And if we can make that connection as the precise chemistry of the different types of garnet, then we have to look for that particular type of garnet gneiss that the boulder is made out of and see where in Canada that it possibly came from. And then we can actually trace a route that the glacier took from Canada, where it picked up that boulder, all the way down to Cleveland, where it then dropped that boulder.
That's amazing. I do want to remind our viewers that if you have a question, to please send it in. We've gotten a couple of questions, and there's one that came in just recently. Sorry, my specs, I got to take them off here. Evan asks about sand. Have plastics or other anthropogenic materials been showing up in the sands that you study, David?
Yes. Not necessarily in the specimens that we have collected along the beaches, but as we're walking along the beaches collecting, there is an abundance of plastic bottle caps and cigarette, cigar little tips, all these bits and pieces of plastic along the shoreline that are in that swash zone. And you see them getting broken up into pieces smaller and smaller and smaller. So no, we haven't actually seen it in our research samples, but we do see it on the beach as we're collecting. And in fact, there's been a really fascinating publication where sand collectors like myself and amateur sand collectors who collected sands along the beaches of Normandy, where the invasion took place for World War II. In that sand, under the microscope, they're finding these little spheres of iron, which are the remnants of the bomb shells and the ships and all the military material, equipment during the invasion of Normandy that has now been broken up and become parts of sand in that sand at that beach.
Wow, wow. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? But fascinating. Do you ever use drones in taking higher level photos of the sands or the beaches uh, at headlands or wherever you are doing your research?
No, I haven't actually used drones yet. Most of the time, I don't need to be that high up. What I do have is an extension pole that I can put an instant camera on and hold that 10, 15 feet up in the air, and that gives me enough coverage to take a nice photograph of what I'm looking at. Most, again, what I'm looking at is tiny microscopic stuff under the microscope. So, anything 10 feet of aerial photograph is plenty big for me.
All right, so we are talking about beaches a lot. Are there other places where you can find sand in the world?
Oh, yes, there is. So we've got our next slide, number 10. And you think of sand, immediately you either think of a beach where there's lots of sand, or maybe the desert where there's lots of sand. But in fact, rivers are a big conveyor belt of sand getting down to the beach or moving along. And you can see, well, a river is basically a tube or conveyor belt that's moving water, and in the water is the sand. So one of the factors of accumulating the material sand is some type of fluid, either air, which is to a physical geologist or a physicist, air is a fluid, is like water is a fluid, and it'll pick up particles and move them. So you can have dust storms in the wind and sandstorms in the wind, and that'll concentrate huge quantities of sand in deserts. Water concentrates and carries away the clay and leaves deposits of sand in rivers that'll eventually make it down to the beach where water keeps washing away the lighter particles and concentrating more and more sand. So you get this huge concentrations of sand at beaches and deserts because of the wind and wave action, and then smaller quantities in the river on its way down to the beach. In fact, I have a small demonstration here. Uh, your average soil, like you find under the grass lawn out in front of your house, the soil is referred to as loams, Loam. And that's a composition of organic material, clay, as well as sand. And if you go out and take a little bit of soil and you put some water into that bottle, notice it's sort of clear right now. Let me put the top on, and you shake it up, the water gets very dirty. And that's what happens after a rainstorm. The rain washes all this light organic and clay material off the Earth's surface and into streams, and streams are all muddy. That's all carried out into Lake Erie. Well, let me dump that out. And I have a bucket here on the floor. I'm not just dumping it on the floor of my house, otherwise my wife would kill me. and put some more clean water in there. Shake it up some more. And what I'm doing is simulating wave action. And eventually, let me put some more water in a couple of times. And so you can get a nice jar, go out to your lawn, grab a hand sample, and keep washing it just like this. Decant off that dirty water. And now I don't know if you can see up close, but well, this is a concentration of sand now. We've gotten rid of all of the different materials in there that are the lighter clays and organics, and now that's sand. We could dry that out and start a sand collection and say, okay, just like any museum specimen, you have to label where it came from, who collected it, and when it was collected, because that's the important part of any museum specimen. We need to know that as a curator. So now we've got this nice little sand sample, once it's dried out, that we could put into a vial and start a sand collection.
So what you've just done in your lab, or actually at your home, people can do at home as well. They can get a little handful of soil, put it in a jar. You look like you had a peanut butter jar of some kind. Shake it up, pour that water off. I noticed that that water was.
Yes. So here's a slide of that, and you can see where the the sediment, after it's been shaken up in the center there, it's all dirty. But if you let it settle out, you'll see that the sand is at the bottom going up to silts and clays. And that's what happens out in Lake Erie and in rivers. The sediment gets concentrated.
I think this kind of answers a question that came in. So, do you have to clean your sand samples before your research? Do you do any cleaning of them, or do you just pick them right off the beach and use them that way?
Um, all museum specimens have to be cleaned before they come into the museum. And we usually do that for, in case there's any insects in there, we want to basically, we'll take the material, put it into a freezer, take it out, thaw it, put it back into the freezer, take it out and thaw it. And that process kills any, say if there were sand fleas in that sand, we wouldn't want to bring it into the lab and then have those fleas escape throughout the lab. So it has to be cleaned in that respect. In some research, like if I were to take samples of soil from your front yard and wash it, I'd have to then continuously wash as I showed. We may even run it through really high grade hydrogen peroxide to digest or get rid of any more organics that are in there. So it's just the inorganic quartz and sand that we want to look for, or the garnet or whatnot. So we can process it, but most of the material we're working with from that swash zone at the beach is already so clean that it's ready to do research on right away. All we need to do is freeze it to get rid of any parasites or microorganisms that are in there that would be bad to have in the laboratory or the museum itself.
Terrific. Wow. Now, one of the things I did see when in the video in your lab is where you had this tube of sand and water and you put a magnet on the outside. And I thought, again, what another fun thing to do at home if you are able to get to a beach to try that. I think pretty much everybody has refrigerator magnets around. So, what was that all about? What was collected on the magnet?
Yes. There's different ways material can be processed or concentrated. You can, in like your garbage going through a recycling center, there's a big magnet that hangs over the conveyor belt, and anything metal in your trash gets picked up by the magnet and separated out. So that's how the trash collectors can actually sort out recyclable metals and other materials out of your garbage before it's all shredded up and thrown into the landfill. So we can take a magnet We can take a gold pan. We can watch the wave action to concentrate. But using a magnet is just a fun, easy way that anybody can do this concentrating of material. So what you need is a plastic bag and a magnet, and then go somewhere where there's sand, whether it's in your backyard, or if you're going to the metro parks, you can take and do this, but make sure you can't collect from the metro parks. So the first thing you do is you take your bag and turn it inside out, all right? And then you put the magnet inside the bag with the bag inside out or inverted. Now let me turn my screen around here, and I will show you my little laboratory that I've got set up. Here we go. Here's my my simulated beach, and I've got my magnet inside the bag, and watch me drag it through the sand and look at all that heavy material. This is iron oxide, or the mineral magnetite, that's now stuck to my magnet. And this is why it has to be inside the magnet, has to be inside of a plastic bag. Because if you didn't have it in the plastic bag, your magnet is going to look like this for the rest of time. That stuff is hard to get off the magnet, especially if it's a very tough magnet. And then we can take and pull it inside out. And there's our concentrated magnetite sand, or black heavy sand, for doing research or just having a sample of. So you can sort out the sand of your front lawn and then do this exact same thing to that sand that you found on your property, and you've got small concentrations of magnetite. You might not have this much in your front lawn, but there's a little bit there that will come out.
That's really amazing that, again, here you are in Ohio. We don't have volcanoes, we don't have mountain ranges, but we've got some awesome geology, whether it's in your backyard or at the beach or in a river system. It's amazing. And again, what you can do with such simple materials. And I'm glad you're sharing that with us. But talking about sand, what other uses of sand other than, I'm thinking, play sand in a sandbox. So sand, what else?
Right. So a rock, or a tiny little piece of sand, to a geologist, that's a whole wealth of information that tells a story about the history of the earth and how that crystal, that rock, all the minerals formed. But there's also the other side of being a geologist, and that's going out and finding things for society, the economic end. Society needs iron, copper, and different materials for society to work. So if we go to the slides, we can see that, in fact, sand is used for many different things in our society, from abrasives for sandpaper to a filler inside of cement in pottery, to components of, if you're creating a good potting soil for your plants, you want to add sand, and that breaks up the clays and makes that potting soil better for irrigation or drainage. There's also fracking sands, foundry sands, and, as we said, glass making. So if we go to the next slide, we can see some close-ups of these. Here is a picture that, if you've been to the Discovery Center at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, right across from the entrance of the Discovery Center is my laboratory with the glass doors, and I frequently have this on my monitor as a live image from my microscope. This is garnet, again, that red crystals, garnet sand with a few black magnetite sands that is glued to a piece of paper. This is a garnet sandpaper just under the microscope, and you can see how beautiful gem quality, clear pieces of mineral that are in there. The next slide is a cutaway. So we took the diamond saw and cut into a piece of pottery, and you can see these little white specks in there are angular fragments distributed throughout the clay. You cannot really fire or make pottery out of pure clay because it'll shatter. This is what's called tempering. And so this quartz sand is put into the clay to give the clay pottery more strength to it, and it keeps it from shattering during firing. So there's the next slide. Shows us your typical soil. And here the diagram on the right shows you the word loam, and that is your perfect soil. And it's a mixture of both silt, sand, and clay, as well as organic material in there. So sand is an important part of just for farming, if you're a farmer or growing trees. Our botany department is well aware of the different types of soils and how sand plays a role in that for the health of all the vegetation. Our next slide is, here's, you can see fracking sands. This is sand from Wisconsin. And again, note the shape of these grains. They're almost perfect little spheres compared to the angular grains that were in the pottery. That was probably quartz that was ground up, mechanically crushed into those sand-sized pieces for the pottery, where here, nature has tumbled these pieces of quartz into these rounded little, like almost ball bearings. So when they high pressure the water going down the well, and this could be for a water well as well as a oil well, they pump water down under high pressure. It shatters the rock. These little ball bearings of quartz go into those cracks and they get stuck. So they're literally rolling into the crack. They get stuck. They reduce the pressure. The crack tries to close, but is now stuck by that ball bearing. And those little ball bearings keep the cracks open, allowing water or oil to flow back out of the earth. So did we have another slide after that? Here we go. Here's one of the big uses of the clean sand up in Michigan, the sand created by the glaciers, is this foundry sand. So you take sand and pack it into a box around a shape, pour iron into it, and you get a casting. And then I think we have one more slide. Oh, this is the next one. So Nancy, I think this is going to be your next question.
Yeah, it is actually, because I was just going to ask. I see different colors of sand. I see different shapes of sand. So how many different types of sands are there?
Oh, there's literally thousands of sands. And one of the fun things you can do with collecting, here, let me grab one or two of my little vials here. Go wash the soil out in front of your house to collect the sand. Or if you're on private property and you can collect sand, next time just grab, all you need is a little tablespoon. Put it into a little jar like this and make sure you label it as to where it came from so it can be recorded. But it's fun collecting the sand and looking at the different colors and textures you can see in there. Go back to that slide, Matt. And there's an actual hobby called an arenophile. So an arenophile is literally by the definition, it's sand loving. So sand fleas are referred to as arenophiles. But hobbyists who love to collect sand have also adopted the name. And if you go to the Wikipedia, and you can see that there's a whole thing about collecting sand. And here are some pictures of amateur sand collections, how people have taken hundreds and hundreds of little tubes and filled them with sand from all over the world, showing you the variety of colors and textures and materials that can be made into sand, or that nature has made into sand. And at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, we have a sand collection. We started back in 2014. We're now well over 200 samples from all over the world. And thank you to our previous educator who's now retired, Joanne Colburn, and Dr. Eddie Herndorfer, who collected sands around Lake Erie for part of a research project and then donated them to the museum. This collection has really grown. And one of the fun things about this hobby of collecting sand is that you can take just a little teaspoon of sand, put it into an envelope, and mail it off to people around the world, like a pen pal, and they'll send you a little tablespoon of sand back over the mail from anywhere in the world, from Saudi Arabia, from all over the place. People will mail these things back and forth. That's how these amateurs get enormous collections of really cool sands.
I would never have thought about collecting sand, but I guess there's something out there for everybody to collect at one time or another. This is amazing. I know our time is running short. We got another interesting question. Doesn't deal with sand, but it does deal with geology. So, can minerals be
Sure.
organic?
Yes, but by strict definition, a mineral is inorganic. But your bones, your teeth, even kidney stones are organically precipitated crystals, or crystalline material, minerals, to be precise, of different things like calcium phosphate. So it is a mineral-like material, but not strictly a mineral, because a mineral, by definition, has to be inorganic. So there's this fine line that, as mineralogists are now starting to explore and work with other researchers, the old definition doesn't quite hold true anymore, because we're finding a lot of really cool organic crystals and crystalline materials that really need to be brought into the world of mineralogy.
All right, so tell me you have some kidney stones in your collection.
I think we do at the museum. We have we have a few teeth. We've actually been doing research in my laboratory on bones. We can section them and look at them under the microscope. But simple things, even like the shell of an egg, is calcium carbonate mineral that has been precipitated by a some type of bird to, and that shell is literally a mineral. You can x-ray it, you can study it just like a mineral, but it was precipitated by an organic living creature.
Well, I think this whole time has just been totally fascinating. Who knew about sands, about, again, the glaciers, our lake, just right in Ohio. So I wanna thank you so much, Dr. Saja, for presenting all of this information. And once we get back into the museum, hopefully soon, maybe some of you, our viewers, will be able to come down to that lab area, peek in, maybe have a chance to chat with you. But I really, really appreciate your time, and I appreciate our viewers. I do want to mention that next Saturday, May 9th, I will be the host, sharing information with Dr. Andy Jones, our ornithologist at the museum, on Scientist Saturday. So, on behalf of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, we thank you for tuning in, and we want you to be safe, enjoy the outdoors, and now it's time. You can check out things that are, again, right under your feet. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.